Hello, everybody. I'm Ed Parcaut, your host of Helping the Brave, and let's bring in our guest today. Our guest is Tim Thomas, and we'll get into everything about him in a minute. How you doing, Tim?
Great to be here this morning, all the way from down under, Australia.
Yeah. There's nothing, if it wasn't for these type of things, we'd never communicate.
Technology gives, but it also takes.
Yeah, you do have to know kind of what you're doing these days with all the different things. And I during the pandemic is when I learned how to do all the podcasting. I've been on radio since 2018, but actually having to podcast, how to set up a studio, how to set everything up, I learned during the pandemic through Clubhouse, which was did you get a Clubhouse at all? It was like an app kind of thing where everybody would go into these different rooms and talk about all the different things, and people were on it for hours and hours and hours,
Yeah, right.
and then that went away after the pandemic. So, because people had to go back to work, right? They couldn't just hang out at home.
We've got to get in the real world occasionally.
That's right. All right. So, and Helping the Brave is all about veterans and, our transitional story. The only question I always ask is, what service were you in and why did you pick it?
Okay. So, I was in the Australian Special Forces, the Commandos. And the only thing particularly unique about my service, Ed, was we were the very first, what was called DRSF scheme, direct recruiting into special forces. Apparently it was something that worked in the States. And so they brought it in for the first time ever in 2004. And that took sort of civilians. And if you passed all the physical, mental, aptitude, psychological testing, you could, do your basic training, do advanced training, and then you had a shot at special forces selection. And if you got through that, then you could, be in the unit. So I was the very first intake in 2004.
Wow. And then how long were you in?
I was in for 6 years, got out 2010.
All right. See, so I say 5 years, 5 months, and 14 days is when I was in, because that's how I don't have exact six, there's no even, because I went in for 4 and then 2 extra. And then, but all the specialty schools I went to, I had to extend, and it ended up being 5 years, 5 months, and 14 days. But who was counting?
Look, there's always one guy that's all about the numbers and in a section. It's good. It's good to have him.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that just worked out that way. That, I was, but it was one of those things where I got a lot out of my service. I got my bachelor's and master's while I was in. I did a bunch of other stuff. You were in for 6 years, is what you said, right? And then
Yep.
what anything come about it? What did you, how was your service?
Sure. I had 2 warlike deployments, East Timor, Afghanistan, and anyone who's served, I kind of, the analogy I use is, the army kind of ages you in dog years. Every 1 year in is like 7 years out. So, you gain a lot of information, but you also accumulate a lot of physical injuries in the process. So physically, I was kind of fine. Like in the unit, you get paid to work out full time. And so I probably had another 8 kilos of muscle mass on my frame. And what we found was a lot of the guys, their muscle mass acted like strapping tape for your injury. So you could function with an injury. But then when you got out and you're not working out full time, your muscle mass fell away. All these sort of injuries came to the surface. So that was, an interesting little experience, on the way out.
And so, well, and I see this breath work in bed, which we'll get to in a minute. But it sounds to me like, in order to go with breath work, usually from what I just found out with what I'm going through. So a lot of people don't deal with certain things when they're in the service. They just get out, everything's perfect, no issues. And then things bubble to the surface 20, 30, 10, 20, 30 years later. And then they have to deal with it, and they haven't dealt with it before because nobody helped them deal with these things. When I was in and got out, you never talked about PTSD. PTSD was the scarlet letter. You never talked about it. You never got help. And now it's like, you'll get help. And it's so much that I started this thing called Operation Firewalk, which is a event for veterans and first responders to help deal with that. And at the end of the night after our event, we do an actual firewalk. And yeah, so this is the second annual one. It's
Well, No, I like what you're doing there, Ed, because you're getting a physical experience and a potential transformation through the body. A lot of the help available, if we're talking PTSD, it's either talk therapy or pills, you know, and pills. I lost 6 years of my life to pills. There's a benefit to them, but there's a massive cost, and no one tells you about the cost of taking them, and also no one tells you how hard it is to get off the damn things. And psychologists, they go to school for 7 years, but no one tells them that, you know, this trauma that a lot of soldiers experience, or defense personnel experience, it goes down deeper than words. You know, words, it can only go so far. And I've had so many people blame themselves when the psychologist doesn't work, but they simply haven't been told that, you know, trauma is stored deeper than words, and like an experience that you're talking about, like an embodied firewalking experience, gives them a chance to access, you know, all those blockages. And I see all injuries, mental or physical, as blockages. We're naturally energetic, but we're energetic to the level of blockages we have. So what a healing experience will do is remove those blockages, and you get to experience life fully connected to yourself and fully connected to others.
So it sounds to me like you had something happen to you and you had to deal with it, and it took a while to deal with it.
Oh, absolutely. And coming out of the experience, I realized how many other people were in that space. And because I had this goal of saving 40 veteran lives from suicide, because that's about how many Australians have lost in Afghanistan. But we've lost, you know, 30, 40 times that amount to suicide.
Right.
And I thought, if I work the rest of my life, I'm going to die happy if I save, you know, 40 veterans from suicide. But fun fact about me, I'm actually dyslexic. You know, I kind of failed high school, but I'm in the top tier of pattern recognition. And I saw a pattern that essentially enabled me to, within 1 year, I had 40 people come up to me saying, you know, if it wasn't for this, I would have killed myself. And the two things I saw that aren't on the spreadsheet was that it doesn't matter if the pain's, you know, emotional or physical, it'll get to a certain duration, Ed, or intensity where it transforms from just pain. Because you and I, we're kind of built to handle pain, but what we can't handle is where pain goes without us knowing, and that is we feel alone, isolated. We're the only ones going through this. We can't talk about it because that'll just burden them. So we tuck it down into ourselves, and we're social mammals. We're, you know, Ed, you and I have experienced what it is to have each other's back. If you've got my back and I've got yours 100%, you know, everything's a very small detail. But if I'm all alone and I don't know who to trust, I can't drop my guard for a second, you know, because then something bad is going to happen. It's going to be my fault. So in that if you don't address someone's isolation, there's millions of dollars that go into, you know, veteran rehab, but it's kind of water off a duck's back if you're not breaking their isolation to start with. And then you have to understand that isolation leads to fatigue, because if you're always having to keep your guard up, you're not sleeping properly. And I just noticed that if we could break isolation and improve quality sleep, then it's like this inner golden compass switched on, and they knew where to go. And that was sort of, yeah, one or two guys a week would say, you know, Tim, this has changed everything. And it wasn't me. It was just me seeing that little pattern that hasn't been addressed by the mainstream, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I mean, I say, and a bunch of people say, the VA was put there to kill us, to get rid of us, because basically that's what I mean. I went for my benefits recently, and I had to read my medical record because I had to upload it. And in the medical record for the VA, it says he understands why veterans commit suicide trying to get in for their PTSD, because we cancel appointments and this, you know, all the stuff that I said, because that's what I see. I see when I went, you know, I heard about it. I've been doing Helping the Brave for 4 years now, and I talked to so many people about it, and they're saying stuff. And I always said we need to scrap the VA and do a totally new system. The Veterans Administration is not really, it doesn't work right. It's a government entity. It's not going to work right. It never will. And we do something else. And going through it, the medical part is great. the mental part is horrible. And I understand they've never dealt with veterans PTSD. Really, they're like you said, here's some pills, go take them, and hopefully because we're losing 50 a day. And if you look at first responders, they're in the same realm as we are. And when I started the fire walk last year, and this isn't going to be about me, Ed's show, it's going to be about Tim's show in a second here. When I started the fire walk last year, I was adamant, veterans only. Then I started dealing with some stuff because everything came out, because everything I'm doing, I deal more with a first responder because I was a corpsman with the Marines station, at Camp Pendleton, and I pulled duty as an EMT paramedic at night. And we'd go out on the freeway when there's accidents. I saw more stuff there than I saw anywhere else. And I'm like, okay, I can see why first responders need the same help. So now I'm all about first responders and veterans and their family. Let's get you in here and get you some help.
Yeah. And that's a credit to you. See, the thing is, it doesn't matter if the threats, like, people often compare themselves. I haven't had as much exposure as the other person, but the cortisol levels inside of us, because most of the time we live in a pretty safe environment. If we have a perceived threat, it doesn't matter if it's real or not, perceived threat, our cortisol levels go up the same. And I've actually seen similar burnout in business people, because to them, a deadline is a deadline. They're dead. They've got their physical survival mechanism attached to their, deadline. So, my people are first responders and veterans. And I think that's where the crucible is. That's where you'll find out whether stuff works or not. Because a veteran will tell you in no uncertain terms. And this is why all this, a lot of the mental health stuff has been proved redundant, because there's veterans in there, there's state of fatigue. They don't have the energy for placebo bullshit. They say, you got to make this work. And they hold them to account. And that's where, if you can find something that can crack that hard veteran nut, you'll crack 50 civilians.
Oh, I totally understand. I totally agree. But I mean, and a lot of times with veterans, if they, didn't go to combat, they don't think they're worthy to get that they would have PTSD for any. And you don't understand. There's just because you didn't actually go down the street, and you need to get the help. You need to get it, because you could have seen stuff in training and other stuff that you did that could have caused problems. But a lot of people, like you said, they're isolation and they don't want to get help, and they won't ask for help because. And I say, you know what? If you were under fire, you'd ask for air support. So what's the difference? Go get the help.
True. And if I could offer something here, I'm part of a research body here in Australia. And what we found is it's not so much the trauma that creates the trauma. What the trauma does is lock in the military way of functioning, because we've got a way of functioning as being connected to people around us. You might not even like them, but that, when you go to the toilet, you go all the way down the end so that people can come in behind you. So it's part of that mindset where we're all working together. And if I experience trauma, that locks in what I already know, because, in the military, for us to function as a complete unit, you've got to knock off the rough edges, as they say, knock them down to build them back up.
Right.
And when you're built up in that way and you've got that connectivity, and you experience trauma locks in your thinking, and it's very hard for you to learn something new. And so when veterans get out, yes, you've got to deal with the trauma, but you do have to deal with what's called the regimentation, a certain way of doing things. Like, we've been swimming in the ocean, we've got these fins on that we've worked hard to get, and now we're on dry land, and it's hard to take the fins off because we've worked so hard to put these on our feet. Why would I get rid of them? And yet my day-to-day is really awkward. So having trauma dealt with is important, but then underneath that, there is a new way, they call it neuroplasticity, basically the ability to adapt to a new environment and function as you would, as best suits you in that environment. Because, when I first left the military, I would go insane in shopping centers, because you would see someone blocking the whole aisle with their trolley, staring at something, not knowing that they're blocking the aisle. And for some reason, that almost pulled the violence out of me, seeing all these people that I considered selfish, because in the unit, if someone was acting in a way where it was just pissing everybody off, that was a form of selfishness. that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. You're a vet. How many times do you lock your car? How many times do you push the button to make sure you locked your car? And how many times do you verify that you did it? Right?
Yeah.
I was at a thing with a bunch of vets. We all lock in our car, and it's like, hey, how many times do you have to hit it? 3 times. Whether that's funny or not, that's the way it is. And that's, yeah. And so how did you, so you were dealing with some stuff. They gave you pills and you said you lost how much of your time of your life?
About 6 years. 6 years. And you know, initially when I started taking, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. It's like long service leave in a bottle. But as time went on, I realized I don't remember a lot of those years that clearly. And I think I lost a bunch of memories previously, because I went to a mate's house a little while ago, and I'm looking around. I'm like, this looks familiar. And he looks at me like I'm stupid. And he goes, Tim, you helped me move in here. And then I'm like, oh, snap. You know, I really, it became aware that my memories were really impacted by these pills. And a lot of the time that I was taking them, it's kind of gray. It's really hard for me to remember specifics. But how breathwork came into it, I was kind of always known as the guy with 20 cents and a toothpick could do more than someone spending millions of dollars in the veteran recovery space. And so breathwork for me originally started in Afghanistan when I was beyond fatigued. You know, you lose mates. You don't get anything that you'd call sleep. But every now and then when you're horizontal, you know, when they get you to take a sight picture on your rifle, you take that deep breath and let it out. I started sort of taking deep breaths and focusing on my non-dominant thumb, breathing into that, like I'm trying to breathe through the tip of my thumb. And eventually I breathed it until it was like light and white. And then I breathed it into my index finger, and then I started pulling this light through my hand, through my body, into everything. And this was untrained. I'm like, this just feels good. Keep doing it. And then when I woke up, I just had more energy. You know, it was like I only had 2 cents worth of energy going to sleep, and I woke up with 8 cents. So I kept on reinvesting, you know, 8 made 16, 32. And I just started getting to this level out of fatigue, just with my breath, untrained. And then when I got out, went through my loop, saw, you know, my fellow veterans suffering, I thought understand that mental health isn't, I don't see it as mental health. I see it as physical disconnection. The more your mind is out into the future worried about something, or the more it's in the past worried about something, you're disconnected from your own body. So the more connected to your body you are, the more your mind is in this moment, the healthier your mental state is, as I've observed. And breath is probably the easiest, best way to bring you back into connection with your body. Because I put it to everyone here listening that if you're at 100%, there's not a damn thing that you can't handle. And this is what breath does. Every time I take a deep, long inhale and exhale, I think, okay, I'm 5% more back in. Then another breath, 10%, another breath, 15. And I just keep topping myself up until I'm in this moment. To be honest, it does a better job than any of the pills that I've taken. It's accessible to everybody. And you don't hear about this sort of stuff, Ed, because no one's making money from it. So it's been my sort of one-man mission to introduce people to essentially this medicine cabinet that's underneath their chest. You know, we don't own a set of lungs. It's a medicine cabinet with a lot of different shelves. You breathe a certain way, you elicit a certain response. You can, you know, if you want to get yourself ready to really go in and, you know, kick ass and chew bubble gum, you can breathe a certain way. If you want to go to sleep, activate your parasympathetic, rest and digest, you breathe a certain way. If you want to connect with a loved one, if you want to, you know, calm down, you know, get yourself ready to go for a run. There's so many medicines that are organically available. And what I'm talking about here is I want people to become physically sovereign again. You know, the sovereignty that we have, you know, this is my boundary, my skin. Okay. I can't control anything outside of that. You know, I had to go through a divorce, lose money, house, home, regular access to kids to realize this boundary here, this is where I'm sovereign. Everything outside of that I can't control. But the good news is what's underneath this skin I can control. And, you know, accessing your breath is a very powerful way to get your sovereignty back and have you seeing just how much we can give ourselves all the things that we're looking for outside of ourselves. You know, I used to drink a lot of alcohol. So I'd say, oh, when I drink alcohol, I can relax. Well, guess what? My breath can do that. You know, I used to have to take pills to go to sleep. Well, I don't need that anymore. I can use my breath. I used to take a lot of pills for my chronic injuries, but breath work done a certain way is anti-inflammatory. You know, so all my pain scales have dropped out. I used to be laid up 3 weeks out of 4. That is no more. And it's all to do with your breath. It's all to do with your sovereignty. But people need to understand there's a whole economy based on you not knowing the power underneath your own skin. Yeah, I think I tangented there a bit, but I hope I answered your question, Ed.
You answered it. You went a little bit further. But how did you, hold on. How did you get, so you started by yourself.
Yep.
And then were you reading books at the time, or you were listening to something to get you going on the breath work? How did you know how to do the breath work to begin with?
Okay, being dyslexic, I don't read a lot, but I was doing it just because it felt right. Okay. And then a friend of mine, a running buddy.
Just so you know, you can listen though, right? You can listen to books.
Oh yeah. Audio. Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah, my dyslexic doesn't confuse the words going through my ears, just reading them.
Because that's why people, right, with the same thing, they don't read PDFs now, they listen to PDFs. Have you done that's changed the world for so many people? I don't read books. I would fall asleep reading a book. I'd much rather listen to the book. I can do a lot of stuff while I'm doing that. But back to you, say you met somebody. You were talking.
Oh, look, so yeah, a running buddy. I just mentioned I had a cold sore. I was about to spend $20 on lysine, as you do when you have a cold sore. He goes, no, do this breathwork technique and you'll get rid of the cold sore. And I'm like, can they do that? He says, give it a try. I'm like, oh, whatever. If it saves me $20, I'll do it. And it freaking worked. But so it became this thing where, you know, I had a bunch of veterans that had very acute symptoms. If something didn't work or fit, they would in no uncertain terms say, we're not interested. And now I'm using polite language. And so, but when you found something that actually worked when it was needed, then that was quite exciting. And breath work was one of those things that if you did it the right way and for the right duration, it would have an immediate impact. Like there are breathwork techniques that'll literally tonight turn your bed into an absolute cloud, kick out all those intrusive thoughts, all the things that we take pills for. I used to take a lot of pills for. I used to take a lot of alcohol for. You know, this is the medicine we can give ourselves. And it wasn't until I had the divorce, and at 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep, and there was a part of me that was saying, Tim, you know that breath work can help you sleep right now, but it's like you can't do it. And this is the thing, when you're in trauma, it's hard to do anything differently. And I sort of discovered that, you know, my mind was like a garden. Whatever I watered growed. And I was watering the weeds of stress, and they grew and grew in my mind garden until they came to a point where eyeballs popped out of them. They became sentient, and they knew and were very invested in me doing the things that fed the stress. So in that moment at 2 a.m., when I had all that crap going through my head, even though I knew breathing would help, I couldn't do it because the stress weeds had me locked in. And this is where a lot of people are at. They get to a certain point of, you know, stress and anxiousness, PTSD, and they know what they should do, but it's really hard for them to do it because the stress weeds are kind of running the show in it. And so that's when I started making these little recordings, because I needed an external audio cue to go, hey, breathe in, in. Okay, breathe out. Okay. And then at somewhere between breath 15 and 25, all the stress weeds get kicked out, and the rest of your brain is like, thank goodness you kicked them out. Keep doing this, is working. So that's where I started making recordings, sharing it with others, so they could go to sleep with breath, and then wake up with breath. And that's where essentially, my company Breathwork in Bed was born, because it's one thing to talk about hacks. It's another thing to go, look, you can integrate this immediately. I've done the work. You just have to click play when you need to.
All right. So now, when you learned this, did you go to does anybody teach this, or you just learned it over time yourself?
I'm a big fan of Wim Hof. He's the Iceman.
I know who he is. When I started getting into cold plunges, I researched everything. I'm one of those guys.
Yeah, so I didn't research so much. I just worked on what worked, and I had this base of veterans to work with. And I'm like, hey, this is really, because I mean, this is the good thing about being a black belt in messing yourself up, is you've got to become a black belt healer. And this is what I tell veterans. You might not think you're special, but I bet you've been through some shit. Okay, and it's our job to turn that shit into fertilizer. And the stinkiest shit makes the best fertilizer. And it might take you a week, a month, a decade to come through that shit, but that's the amount of time you're going to be able to save others, So, knowing that I'm a certain disposition and finding something that works and then testing it in real time, that was my crucible for knowledge. And I've just taken the ones that work, and made it as widely available as possible.
All right. And so if people want to learn more about breath work, they go Breathwork in Bed. Is that the name of the place they go? Or
yeah. So, I mean, you can go Breathwork in Bed, the website, but it's probably easier. We're doing, 28 days free sleep trial on the app. Just pull up your phone, put in Breathwork, one word, in bed, and you literally tell it when you want to sleep, when you want to wake up, and we take care of the rest. Because people, they're already busy. They don't want extra stuff to do. But if they can have something that just falls out of your phone when you need it, and you just go tap, tap, that's sort of the goal. And what ends up happening is, once sleep starts improving, it's like this magic happens everywhere else in their life. When they've got more energy, they've got more options, they're less reactive, they're more creative. And, in the Special Forces, we knew nothing of the science of sleep, but we knew if we could deny the enemy sleep for 3 nights, it would mess them up better than a bullet. And so, these days I say, if you genuinely care about somebody, you'd care about how they sleep. If you want to destroy someone, destroy their sleep,
I totally agree. I mean, because there's things that we don't, if I don't get a good night's sleep, I'm not worth anything tomorrow. But then, you keep doing it over and over again. That's how we gain weight. That's how we do a lot of stuff, is not getting enough sleep.
Sleep is the soil from which everything grows, as they say. But the world we live in is very visual. So if we use the tree analogy, if my trunk's not in the right shape I want it to be, then there's a bunch of stuff I could buy to get my trunk in shape. If I don't have the fruit in my life that I want to have, there's a bunch of stuff I could buy to help me with my fruit. But someone who understands how to grow trees doesn't look at the outside, it goes into the soil. And so, what I really encourage people to do is become a boss of your own sleep and watch every single part of your life improve. Health, beauty, work, finances, relationships. If you can get that part to work, everything, it's the universal lever, everything flourishes. And conversely, we all know what it is to have a bad night's sleep, and how terrible the next day is.
Tim, thank you so much for being on the show today and explaining what you did. I appreciate it. All the way from down under. I appreciate you being here today. Is there anything else you want to add before we go?
Oh, it's just great being here. And if anyone needs any extra help, please reach out. Breathwork in Bed.
Yeah, I definitely will check it out myself. I appreciate you being here today, Tim. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much.
All right, Ed.